Paul, I think you're still muted. Paul, you're still muted.
Now, did I get to where I'm verbal?
Yes,
And do we have Kylie's picture in front?
yes.
Okay. Before we begin this evening, I want to intrude with our regular process by the note that I understand that the LDS Church has produced a new edition of the Book of Mormon this year. Just recently, it's come out, I understand, which has a revised introduction. And I think that matter may be a matter of interest for discussion in the group, but I would raise the question anyway, because I think a couple of our previous presenters may have been instrumental in seeing that production. I'll leave the matter there at this point, but because I want to give the time to Kylie for her presentation as priority, but perhaps in the discussion afterwards, the matter will come up again. It is then my pleasure to welcome. Let me see if I can get the picture enlarged. Is that not? Maybe I better be content where it is. Our guest speaker tonight is Kylie Nielson Turley. She teaches English and ancient scriptures at BYU. Her study of Alma the Younger shows him to have been probably older than what most of us have perceived, and that is old enough to have had a good deal of experience from which to repent and repair. And her discussion on the making of reparations in our lives, I think, will be instructive, and I anticipate that we'll all benefit from her discussion. The lessons from his life urging us to learn to love and to repair and to replace wicked ways with those of righteousness echo the inclination to retain our past. She and her husband have 5 children and a grandson of whom they welcome to their home in Provo, Utah. And so we welcome Kylie for this her first opportunity to present to us. She was recommended by Val and James, I believe, and they had picked up on her presentation at an earlier session at another conference, and so their recommendation was sufficient for me to simply say, if we can get her on the forum, then we definitely want to. And so I'm pleased that she has consented. She came last week to check us out and was willing to come back afterwards, and so that's a good sign. Let me see if I can get that to move. For some reason, why it's not moving.
Well, it's a great picture. That was at the end of this past summer. We went to Hawaii for a couple weeks. We sent our youngest daughter to college, and I said, I don't even want to go home to an empty house. And we went to Hawaii for a few weeks. My husband had some work over there. And everyone is saying, how is it being an empty nester? And I thought, well, I had it for about 2 weeks, and they were in Hawaii, so that was great. And then my son moved back home, so we're no longer an empty nest family. And I know that's the situation for lots of people now. If I share my screen, will that work?
Let me offer the opening prayer, and then we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, perfect.
So let us pray together. Loving and forgiving God, whose awesome creation, beyond our ability to measure or appreciate, gives evidence of eternity. We bow in acknowledgement of our insignificance, yet the consequential implications of your paternity, for perceiving you as father, parent with this beautiful earth, our mother, places us as members of your family and gives us meaning and belonging in spite of our depravity. Come on. Kern? Well, sad when I can't get the thing to work. There we go. We come before you this evening to ask your blessing on our Zoom forum, that your spirit guide our thoughts and actions. For here we focus upon Scripture, the quest for the sacred, obviating physical attractions, seeking to find our way past our legacy of war, greed, pollutions, fear, and distrust, to realign, to repent, to repair, and reach out to you as we know we must. If we are to fulfill the purpose in which you have created in each of us and do our part in the plan for peace that you have implemented. So we ask for you to bless our presenter, Sister Nielson Turley, and our participants to explore the Scripture amicably, your purposes as well, that our understanding of you and your intent can be incorporated into the life story we tell. And that in the name of Jesus, the Prince of Peace, whose presence in our lives we celebrate in this Christmas season. Sister Nielson Turley, the floor is yours, and I will stop sharing, and so you are welcome to share or just simply move ahead with your comments if you like. And while we normally allow the presenter to present and then move into questions and answer afterwards, if you would like to have people interrupt, then that's your choice.
I think I would prefer to go till the end, how you usually do things.
Very
That I think some of the questions that people might have along the way will actually be answered as we continue moving forward.
Good.
So if that is okay with everyone, that is how we will do it. Hopefully you can see that, yes?
Yes.
And I have to tell you, I tend to get excited about what I'm talking about and completely forget the visual. So if we stay on a slide too long, you probably should nudge me forward or something like that. And actually there's not too many slides here that really matter that much. So I wanted to talk about what I call faith in the real world, kind of a practical kind of faith from some studies. Anyway, it says, a few years ago, I was talking with some friends about the Book of Mormon. Actually, if you know me much at all, then you know those last 5 words are unnecessary. Of course, I was talking about the Book of Mormon. What else is there to talk about? My children have been known to complain that the Book of Mormon is all I talk about. But let's continue with my story. One of my friends indicated that she did not believe we could read the Book of Mormon down to the word level. She insisted that it's just not possible to read it as if individual words are meaningful. I said, that has not been my experience. My friend explained that how she thought the translation process worked and why the authoritative people supported the theory she was advocating. She ended by restating her original opinion that you simply cannot read down to the word level. As mildly as I could, I restated my original response. That has not been my experience. When my friend began to explain again, rather vigorously this time, figured it was time to slip away. I could see that she was not suddenly going to ask, and Kylie, what has your experience been with the Book of Mormon? Funny thing is that I actually find her assessment of translation theories to be fairly persuasive, but not enough to say I am convinced my personal experience must be wrong. My study of the Book of Mormon has convinced me time and time again that not only can I study down to the word level, I should. Let's see, there we go. I believe that I praise God and his son, Jesus Christ, who's named the Word, by reading as carefully and as attentively as I can. Far from falling apart under such scrutiny, the Book of Mormon has instead flourished in amazing and wonderful ways. That is my experience. So my self-assigned challenge in this speech is twofold. I will address the topic of faith by explaining what I've learned about faith from reading the story of King Lamoni, and especially from King Lamoni's wife. But I hope that you will note not only the content of what we're talking about tonight is faith, but also the process by which I discovered and made sense of this content. The discussion of faith to me is the byproduct of reading small. That is to say, I think there's much to learn about faith by reading slowly. One of the Book of Mormon's purposes is to show its intended audiences its message. As most any first-year writing student can explain, it's a very different thing to show rather than to tell. My plan is to tell you about faith and show you how to read down to the word level. Presumably, I know many of you already know these things. In the story of King Ammoni, Ammon praises the queen's exceeding faith, claiming that there has not been such great faith among all the people of the Nephites. I'm wondering, does anyone else find this statement confusing? The source is Ammon, the Ammon who sees angels, who leads missionary expedition, the land of enemies and bitter dissenters, and who fights sheep-stealing brigands single-handedly. Is the queen's exceeding faith merely another example of Ammon's enthusiastic hyperbole? Is exceeding faith an appropriate way to address the sorrow and most likely denial so overwhelming this young widow? If faith is the question, members of my faith tradition and your faith tradition typically turn to Alma 32, which is Alma's famous sermon to the Zoramites about faith, the metaphoric planting of seeds. If the seeds grow, the metaphor continues, with the tending of the seedling until it grows into a tree. This growth process is what Alma uses to explain his idea that faith is not to have a perfect knowledge of things. People do not have knowledge, then Alma concludes that you hope for People do not have knowledge, then Alma concludes that you hope for the things which are not seen, which are true. Despite its popularity, this definition initially seems awkward, impractical, or even nonsensical. What does the queen's faith have to do with seeds, or planting, or a perfect knowledge of things? What things? Any things? Why does Alma say that faith is not to have a perfect knowledge rather than simply saying faith is not perfect knowledge? Then he says, if you have faith, you hope for things. Is hoping for things equated with faith? Or is it the outgrowth of having faith? And there are those things again. Why things? This definition may not be as helpful as we originally thought. Even this quick perusal of Alma 32:21 can demonstrate why some readers feel confused by this definition, just as it did for Alma's ancient listeners. Alma's direct audience in the Book of Mormon wondered how they should plant the seed, or the word which he had spoken. Do modern readers feel similarly? What does Alma's definition mean, and what does it have to do with the queen and her faith? Alma's definition and Ammon's comment need something more if they're going to work together and make sense. A tiny two-word phrase, as if, seems to be the missing element. Alma's definition is connected to as if, and this Lamanite conversion narrative, we find a faith that is active, rational, agentive, and relational. And that faith involves a deliberate choice to act as if. Readers do not notice as if. They're unlikely to see that what Alma calls faith finds precisely what is going on in the queen's story. Readers combine as if, the story of the queen, and Alma's definition, they will see that the three interdefine each other, working together to explain faith better than any single one of them does alone. Together they explain a practical, lived, as if faith, and that faith has some surprising implications. The deliberate choice to act as if allows what is hoped for to become or to remain real. It explains why more faith will not make more things happen more quickly. Why a fleeting thought of doubt has little impact on faith. Why, contrary to what many assume, disbelief, not faith, is regularly a self-fulfilling prophecy with a predictable outcome. So, let's see. In the beginnings, the phrase as if is used 50 times in the Book of Mormon. Despite its small size, it can carry a heavy load. For example, the phrase can be used for exclamatory statements of disbelief. You can think of Alicia Silverstone in Clueless, as if, and a few others might be thinking about the use of as if that's found in Isaiah 10:15. And I'm guessing that's probably the first time that clueless and Isaiah have been used in the same sentence, if I'm not mistaken. I actually Googled that and did not find any hits. It's pretty funny. As if can be used for an intent to deceive, or as a way for an honest narrator to explain what another character is thinking or feeling. It can indicate, oops, I told you I would get excited and forget to move things forward.
Sorry.
It can indicate an interrupted action, or it can be a way to heighten the dramatic. There are other phrases such as though that work similarly. In this story, as if works as a typical type of paranarrative communication. It does so by sharing something with readers that is beyond the scope of the story. Let me explain this little phrase a little bit more. As and if are excellent words. Separated as signifies a comparison, a metaphoric statement. While if hints at a hypothetical or consequential phrase, an if-then type of statement. When those two elements are combined, the result is much more potent than the sum of their parts. The combination creates an unreality, or in this situation, a statement that should not be taken factually. While all that sounds complicated, it's actually rather intuitive. For example, Moroni addresses future readers, Mormon 8:35, stating, I speak as if you were present, and yet you're not. Moroni understands as if. He's suggesting that if his future readers were present, then he would speak as he's speaking and about the topic he's speaking about. He's certain that if future readers were a visible, tangible audience sitting in front of him, he would call them pollutions and hypocrites and tell them that they adorn themselves with that which hath no life, while forgetting to serve or help their neighbors in need. This is the topic about which he would speak and the hostile style in which he would address them. But his future readers are not present. They will never be present to hear Moroni speak in his present. It is impossible. Modern readers should pause and understand. Something unreal, you and I, and other modern readers being Moroni's real in-person audience, has impacted something that is absolutely real. The words of Mormon chapter 8. A world in which as if is used is a world in which the unreal, the hypothetical, and the conditional can impact and change or alter the real world. These tiny words, as and if, play out in the same manner in the Queen's story. There's conditionality or hypotheticality in the sequencing suggested by the if. If a person dies, then he or she will fall to the earth. The metaphoric aspect, the as, suggests that King Lamoni looks as someone looks when they die. Combining those two elements creates something that is unreal. King Lamoni falls to the earth as if he's dead, but he's not. He certainly appears to be dead, but again, he is not. Lots of people think he's dead. He lays as if he were dead for the space of 2 days and 2 nights, a time frame that readers should notice. No matter how dead he appears on those 2 days and 2 nights, he is not. Despite appearances, King Lamoni is as if dead, not actually dead, something that the Queen must wait until Alma 1912 to discover. Readers, on the other hand, have known this since Alma 1842, the verse describing King Lamoni's as if death. When this verse says that King Lamoni fell unto the earth as if he were dead, the reading audience understands that the king is alive. Readers who move too quickly may miss just how momentous this moment is. The discrepancy between what readers know and what the people in the story know is as big as the difference between life and death. For 13 long verses, modern audience members are reading a different story than the queen is living. Despite the fact that both the queen and the readers are moving through the exact same events, the queen as she lives them and the readers as they read the text are not even regarding the same conflict from different points of view. They're not facing the same conflict or considering the same problem. The queen is living in a story in which the main conflict is whether her husband is alive or dead. Modern readers are engaged in a story that is about the queen and what she will do. The question about the king was answered before readers thought to even ask it. Lamoni's wife knows her husband looks dead, and yet for some reason she begins to doubt what her eyes see. She calls for Ammon, believing that he may be a prophet of a holy God, the God who gives him power to do mighty works. Ammon tells the queen that her husband is not dead, that she should bury him not, because on the morrow he shall rise again. What should the queen do? From the reader's perspective, the queen's most rational choice is obvious. Wait a few days. But waiting a few days is not as simple as it seems. There is no way that that advice will be received well in this fractured society. From a practical point of view, bodies decompose. They begin to smell. A reality that is already upsetting some people in this story. The society, like many others, may be one in which practical concerns are often supported by social or religious tradition. Fears about disease and cleanliness may give rise to the tradition those who passed away be buried quickly, even the same day as death occasionally. If this society has remnants of an Israelite tradition, and they believe that to be unburied is the ultimate disgrace. Moreover, they also believe that any who touch a dead body are rendered unclean for 7 days. This means that more people are becoming ritually unclean by the day. If the queen disallows the burial, her actions could be interpreted as dishonoring her husband, violating Mosaic law, instigating a health hazard, and creating a situation that causes many people to become ritually unclean. The queen seems unaware of these fractures and instability in her society. She does seem aware of these fractures and instability in her society. Before she sends servants to fetch Ammon, she's already heard about the fame of Ammon. Talked to the servants of her husband, and she knows what some say and what others say about her husband's body. Likely, she's also aware that her people are quick to assume evil has come upon them and to blame someone else for that evil. Some ascribe evil to King Lamoni because he slew his servants who had had their flocks scattered. Others believe evil came upon them because King Lamoni suffered the Nephites should remain in the land. The group of Lamanites who delighted in the destruction of their brethren and purposely scattered the flocks with that intent are also exceedingly angry with Ammon for fighting back. Between weeping and scared servants, bloodthirsty Lamanite outlaws, and those who blame the king for various evils, this situation is highly unpredictable. The explosive political environment, hostile populace, and general uncertainty at a time of grief and mourning make this situation volatile and complex. Any choice is going to offend some, but aligning with the Nephite is sure to provoke many. This is the situation facing the queen, and it seems almost impossible to untangle. I'm assuming you can sort of hear the voices in the background. Is that bothering you? Anyone? Is it okay, or is it too loud?
Not loud enough.
I'm not hearing any voices in the background, Kylie.
Perfect. I'm hearing my children speak a little loudly, so I was about to stop this all and go get upset with them, but I will leave them alone. They're not bothering you. And then we have as if confusing this story even more. The queen's situation is politically perilous and perhaps even physically dangerous. The readers may overlook it all, not realizing that 2 tiny words conveyed information that changed the story for them. Does anyone understand that reality and unreality are twisting together, entangling and mixing up this story's plot? Readers do not know why King Lamoni collapsed, And the people inside the story are unaware that there's a need to ask. Cause and effect sequencings are not working correctly in this plot. The cause, death of King Lamoni, is not real. It did not happen. However, that unreal is about to break into reality. King Lamoni is not dead, which should lead the story to a very happy ending, a non-burial for a non-dead king. But if those who want to bury the king actually do so, they will leave the story with a very unhappy ending, a real burial for a non-dead king. What should be done? In Alma's theology, the definition of faith leads to a metaphor of planting seeds and growing a tree. The fulfillment of faith is a mature tree of life that produces fruit that fills one forever. Having faith is acting in a manner that looks forward to that fruit, namely by planting, tending, nourishing the seed. Alma tells readers that planting a true seed or a good seed means not casting it out by their disbelief. Readers, besides equating true with good, Alma says that the knowledge of the goodness of the seed is real, and argues that it is real because it is light and is also discernible. Intimating that all these words are near synonyms. In the high-pressure circumstances surrounding Lamoni's as-if death, the queen has a big problem. She does not have a perfect knowledge of things, even very important things, such as whether her husband is dead or alive. If she knew what was real or true, she could make her decision easily. If the king is dead, she should bury him. If the king is not dead, she should not bury him. But in this situation, what is real or true cannot be discerned. Lacking perfect knowledge leaves the queen with a choice and a consequence of that choice. The queen can allow the servants to take his body and lay it in the sepulchre. If he's dead, that should not change anything. But what if he's only as if dead? Burying him alive will cause his actual death. This is critical for readers to understand. Burying the king's body has one guaranteed outcome: death. Alma's definition of faith continues to describe the queen's situation. Readers understand that the queen is willing to hope her husband is alive, even though she has not seen evidence of that possibility. The queen's hope is what informs the decision she must make. The queen has had no witness save Ammon's word and the word of the servants. She declares that she will believe that it shall be according as thou hast said. This is what Ammon calls great faith. And it is according to Alma's definition. The queen states her faith in terms of believing what Ammon says, and then acting when she chooses to watch over the bed of her husband. From that time, even until the time on the morrow, which Ammon had appointed he should rise, which of course would be the third day then. Fortunately for the king, the queen believes what Ammon says. The younger queen's belief in Ammon's words allows time for her husband to recover. Thus the queen's faith saves the king's life, sort of. At least her belief halts those who are sure that Lamoni's body stinketh and ought to be placed in the sepulchre. The queen is determined to wait and to watch, which halts the burial and the king's possible death. If the queen's belief in her actions, it is the queen's belief in her actions that save Lamoni. They do not raise him from the dead, but they do save him from being killed. She acts as if what Ammon says is real, and that is what allows her husband's life to be spared. So we have some implications if this is the model of faith that you believe. Faith is an action, a choice in an action, not only patience, thinking, or feeling. While it might appear that faith is patience or a magical power, an intense cognitive focus, or an emotional connection with deity, it is not. It is not according to Alma's definition. In this story, faith is choice with action. The queen makes a tough decision in an unpredictable situation Then she ensures that that faithful decision is given the time needed to manifest what is real or true. The husband stays beside her husband all night, watching the man she loves, possibly watching to protect him as well. In the sermon to the Zoramites, Alma says 3 times, nurturing the seed requires patience and faith and diligence. Patience is part of faithfulness, but it's not the same. The queen could sit passively and patiently and simply hope what she wants will happen. If she does not talk to Ammon, does not choose to believe him, does not communicate what she wants, and does not sit beside her husband, then her hoped for outcome has very little chance of success. Those people who are more motivated will likely decide what they think ought to be done. The body of King Lamoni will be buried in the sepulchre by the 3rd day. If the queen simply waits, her husband will end up as dead, as some assume he already was. Infusing patience and faith is largely a byproduct of this particular situation. Faith is not simply sitting around and waiting, no matter how much it may appear to be so when considering the queen's situation. We could consider another as-if situation and see that action is required. For example, consider this less religious but realistic event from my own life. I grew up in Wyoming and my family hunted wild game. Hunting was never my favorite thing to do. So after I was married, I decided to send my husband to participate in the hunt. My husband agreed to go, not because he loved hunting, he'd never really done it much before, but because he wanted to get to know his new in-laws. My mother thought it was a marvelous idea, which is how and why my husband and my mom spent a few days together in the mountains of Wyoming, traipsing up and down trails, through meadows, fording streams, and riding horses, chatting the entire time about gospel, life, growing up, family, and whatever else suited them. My father was not amused. He tried to shush them, explaining time after time that their chatter made the hunt pointless. The problem is that hunting requires people to act as if. There may or may not be animals present in the next thicket of trees, in the valley just over the next hill. But as my dad tried to reiterate, if people value finding wild game, they must behave as if the animals are there. If they behave otherwise, then the animals will not be there. Skittish wild game will almost certainly be frightened by the sound or the smell of people. Then the animals will slip away quietly. Faith may look like patience in some instances, but other scenarios, like this one, demonstrate more clearly that faith is not simply waiting. In a similar way, and for some of the same reasons, faith is not simply thinking. The relationship between belief and action is not something that is explored in great detail in the queen's situation. When she settled on her faithful and active commitment to non-burial, what she thinks does not actually matter that much. A random stray thought or feeling of creeping doubt does not change what is real. The queen must believe enough to act. But forcing herself to pray harder, believe stronger, will not make what is real somehow more real. If she sings hymns all night, talks only of the Book of Mormon, or sits beside her husband simply holding his hand, will not make Lamoni more or less alive. She may think about her fears for her people, her children, and everyone in this fractious society. As long as she remains committed to her chosen course of action, Lamoni will rise when he rises. Queen's thought, do not alter what is real, at least we do not until those thoughts have become powerful enough to convince her to change how she is behaving. Implication number 2. This belief is predictable, but it creates tragedy and hides reality. You're seeing examples of my editing. I cannot stop editing anything, so as my words on the screen are different than my words on my paper. Ironically, it is disbelief or lack of faith that has the power to change reality in predictable and yet devastating ways. An unwillingness to believe that King Lamoni is only as if dead ensures the worst possible outcome. King Lamoni will be dead after he is buried. even if he was not dead before. In this situation, disbelief will create the tragedy that the queen and her children are lamenting. If the queen rejects what Ammon has told her, she will alter what is real, run roughshod over what was true, and fulfill her own worst nightmare. She could very well cause the situation she desperately hopes is unreal. It is in this manner that disbelief creates a situation in which an unbeliever may never know what is real. In the Book of Mormon scenario, King Lamoni's wife makes the faithful choice not to bury him. But if she had lacked faith in Ammon's words, she had buried her husband, then how would she ever know with certainty that King Lamoni was dead when he was buried? He may have been dead or alive. Doubt hides what is real. In this as-if story, a lack of faith distorts and hides what's true, even as it changes and ruins what could have been real. It changes fear of the unknown and changes it for predictability and tragedy. Faith is relational. Once Ammon gives his message to the queen, he fades to the background, leaving the queen momentarily in the spotlight. But Ammon's perspective is unique. And he went in to see the king according as the queen had desired him. He knew the king was not dead. Ammon also can perceive the thoughts of the king as a portion of the spirit dwelling in him, and has the knowledge and also the power of God. Despite his godlike perspective, Ammon is overpowered with joy when he sees the queen's choice and the result. Is he surprised? Despite knowing what is real, Ammon seemingly did not know what King Lamoni's wife was going to do. Even with his amazing point of view, Ammon also lives by faith, acting as if the queen will believe, hoping that this woman that he barely knows will preserve the life of his friend. When she does, he is overjoyed. And thus it appears that Ammon's faith has this hidden aspect. It is relational. When the queen acts as if her husband is alive, she's risking trust in Ammon and his God. That is inherently unpredictable. Trusting in a person means being vulnerable. It's opening oneself up to being hurt or betrayed or let down. And the queen really stand to do it. What if she believes Ammon and then learns that her husband really is dead? And then she has to go through all the shock and lamenting of those first few days all over again. Faith is not easy. There's no guarantee. But it is not irrational wishful thinking either. It is a deliberate choice to trust in a person, to make decisions based on that relationship. Disbelief, a lack of trust, is typically described in terms of cognitive thought. But in these stories, the lack of faith seems to have more to do with distrust. In the as-if story about King Lamoni's father, the queen of all the Lamanites rushes to her husband, who, like his son, has collapsed on the ground and appears to be dead. The queen saw him lay as if he were dead, and also Aaron and his brethren standing as though they had been the cause of his fall. This queen, the older queen, clearly believes what she sees with her own eyes and is willing to act upon her own perceptions. Rather than trusting in a person, disbelief relies on self, and often on one's own perceptions. It is predictable, which can make it feel safe. But the price for that safety is high. Disbelief leads to certain tragedy and certain pain. Number 4, faith is not about the outcome. Certainly, certainty of outcome is what many of us want. We want it so much that we tend to work backwards. We assume that someone has faith if the outcome is positive. But if faith is acting as if, it's not actually dependent on outcome. Faith is the belief-inspired action. It is the act of being faithful that deserves praise. The outcome is not our business. We do not decide what is real or true in these types of situations. God does. In fact, not only do we not know what is real or true, but according to Alma, we cannot at first know. And God desireth that you should believe even on his word. It says in Alma 32:22. We do not know, we cannot know, and God in his mercy wants it that way. Alma explains why in his honest, straightforward way. How much more cursed is he that knoweth a thing and doeth it not, and he that only believeth or hath cause to believe, and falleth into transgression. Nowhere in Alma's pithy one-verse definition of faith is there anything that indicates that people are responsible for the result of faithful action. Alma begs the Zoramites to plant seed. That is the faithful action he hopes they will perform. But he recognizes that acting in faith to plant a seed does not guarantee the conclusion. Alma explains that if the seed groweth, it is good. But if it groweth not, behold, it is not good. Therefore it is cast away. Zoramite responsibility at the beginning is simple. Plant the seed. Whether that seed is good or bad is not up to them. Notably, even after they learn that a seed that grows is good, and even after their knowledge is perfect about that particular seed, they still need faith. Acting in faith then becomes nourishing their small seedling. In a similar manner, the young queen acted faithfully when she extended trust in Ammon's words, not knowing what was true, and yet believing in Ammon's words and trusting enough in Ammon that she acted. Regardless of how this faith-filled story concludes, the queen's actions remain faithful. Even if the action of faith uncovers the reality that the seed is not good and should be cast away, or that the king is dead and ought to be buried in the sepulchre after all. The queen acted in faith. Her choices allowed what is true to manifest itself, to become discernible. Her responsibility is only to act faithfully, not to force her husband to not be in the state he appears to be in. Faith is difficult, and any person, even a queen with exceeding faith, may doubt that faithful action is strong. Some people may worry that they will sabotage what they most want if they wonder or question. What if a thought of doubt flits across the stage of your mind? An Alma's faith model, random stray thought, does not unplant a seed, nor does a moment of questioning move a king's body from his bed to a sepulchre. Thoughts and beliefs absolutely matter, but until thoughts rise to the level of action, they do not change the result or the outcome of faithful action. This is the question, though, as if faith model transferable to other situations. Is Alma's definition of faith is understood through the as if decision-making process, transferable to other faith-filled situations? Perhaps. In the last chapter of the Book of Mormon, Moroni exhorts readers to ask if these things are not true. This phrasing is why many people pray to know if the Book of Mormon is true. And then wait for a witness from the Holy Ghost to know. I have nothing against that process. I have no reason to doubt the experiences of others. It just did not work for me. I prayed and prayed and prayed on multiple occasions for various lengths of time, in my closet, in the church, out in nature. I never felt like I really received an answer, at least not in the way that other people do. One of my sisters noted the not phrasing years ago, asked me, is God really sitting up in heaven, not answering heartfelt prayers because of a slight wording issue? My answer then and now is, I really don't know. But I do know that Alma says faith is not to have a perfect knowledge of things. And I also know that Alma says that there are many people who say, that will show unto us a sign from heaven, then we shall know of a surety, and then we shall believe. I'm afraid that's exactly what I wanted God to do for me. I wanted to know that the Book of Mormon is true, so that then I could believe. I wanted proof of the real and the true before I committed to trying anything. I wanted to see and to know beforehand, so that I would not be disappointed. That is not how faith works, at least not according to Alma. I should warn you that I might be wrong. I guess I probably should have told you that in the beginning, right? When Moroni tells readers to ask if these things are not true, he might be using this phrasing rhetorically, as if he were explaining, how could these things not be true? Another scholar suggests this phrasing could be a negative if clause, which implies that the things are indeed true. But what if Moroni meant exactly what he said? What would it look like to see Moroni's proposition in light of Alma's as-if model of faith? Moroni suggests we ask God if the Book of Mormon is not true. Like the Queen, we are stuck in the middle. We do not have a perfect knowledge regarding this book. Perhaps we can strip away some of the clutter and consider where that leaves us. If God did not mercifully bring this book into your life, what should you do? Frankly, if this is not a book from God, a reasonable reaction might be to throw it in the trash or the recycle bin and move on. Actually, please don't throw your Book of Mormon in the trash. I'll take it. I will read it for you. Why would you waste so much time and effort on something that's not true? But, similar to the Queen's decision, this comes with a warning. If you throw the Book of Mormon in the trash, the Book of Mormon becomes trash to you. The book will be dead to you. That is all it can be. The result is predictable, guaranteed, and so secure. But at what price? Are you willing to risk faith instead? Faith is not an assurance of the result or the outcome. Faith is choosing to believe that the Book of Mormon is not true. What then? If the Book of Mormon is not true, then plant a seed or two. Maybe try watering the seed, putting the seedling that grows outside in the right amount of sunlight, putting appropriate nutrients into the soil. What does Alma's seed metaphor mean about the Book of Mormon? Well, first, this is metaphoric or symbolic language, so we should not take it literally. In other words, do not go plant the Book of Mormon in your front planters. All that will do is turn your book into a soggy mess. Metaphor means we should try out the Word of God. We should try it out because we've learned the Book of Mormon is not true. That critical question is answered. We should try to learn from the Queen. We can act in faith, which means making a choice and acting as if. It means reading your scriptures, studying, gaining insights, trying to understand this book and then live by its teachings and principles you're inspired to understand. Alma's metaphoric experiment does not grow a bean plant. That makes me a little sad, considering I don't know if they do this in the church of in your faith traditions, but considering how many of us believed in faith that it would grow in food that can be eaten in a few months, we always planted bean seeds in little Dixie cups in primary. It's a great object lesson, but it might lead us astray a little bit because this seed is becoming a tree of life. Faith leads to life. How long does it take us to grow a tree of life? I don't know. But I do know that Alma's definition of faith requires some amount of time. What this means is that for some of us, the truth of the Book of Mormon is discovered in the living of it. We discover as we live whether the Book of Mormon is true or good or light or real. This option is uncertain, unlike perfect knowledge. The Book of Mormon may still end up being something other than true. But at least there's an opportunity to discover that reality. Acting as if the Book of Mormon is true means planting a seed and experimenting. Will it grow a tree? Maybe. Maybe not. First, as the Queen's story demonstrates so vividly, there is another way. You could not plant a seed. But be aware that not planting leads to one sure outcome. There will not be a tree. There will not be life. King Lamoni's father and mother faced an almost identical situation. Unlike his son, who seems to spontaneously erupt into prayer, King Lamoni's father must be taught by Aaron. Aaron tells the king to pray in faith, believing that you shall receive. The definition of faith that does not sound like Alma's choice in action kind of faith. How is King Lamona's father supposed to marshal his mind and his thoughts into order and then shove everything into a container of belief and make it fit? How is he supposed to pound his heart and his hot temper and other emotions into submission? How can he make them bow to a God he knows so little about? Is Aaron telling readers the secret about how to squeeze belief out of unbelief? King Lamona's father may not know the answer to these questions. I question whether he does because he seems to blithely ignore Aaron's instructions. Instead of believing in God and believing that he will receive, this king, the older king, bows down before the Lord upon his knees and offers a breathtakingly honest prayer. He says, "O God, Aaron hath told me that there is a God. And if there is a God, and if thou art God, wilt thou make thyself known unto me?" We could quibble about some minimal level of faith necessary to say that prayer at all. But regardless, the prayer is still shockingly faithless. At least it is if faith means the type of firm belief in God that Aaron's describing. Lamona's father does not focus intently on Jesus. It's not mindfully block out stray thoughts of doubt, nor does he step back and wait patiently to see what happens. Instead, he fully admits that he does not know if God exists. Rather than hypocritically pretending to believe in a God he does not believe in, he prays truth, because he is true. King of the Lamanites prays effortlessly, prays without an ounce of showmanship or insincerity. Rather than praying the right way in front of Aaron, and then wondering if he really believes or not, prays what is real or true to him. He's utterly congruent. For King Lamona's father, acting as if is not knowing what God will do or even knowing there is a God. It's not knowing if the Book of Mormon is not true or not true. Acting as if is knowing himself. He binds himself with the surety of someone who has scoured his soul, knows the depths of his own sinful nature, is unflinchingly honest with himself about that nature. When he prays, he offers to give away all his sins, the ones he secretly enjoys, the ones he's ashamed of, the ones he did not even know were sins until Aaron started expounding the scriptures. From the depths of his well-searched, magnificently honest soul, Lamona's father prays to a God who may or may not exist, and who, even if he does exist, may or may not be Aaron's God. Nevertheless, for the chance to know this God, for the chance to be raised from the dead and be saved, King Lamona's father will give away all his sins. How can he promise such a thing? It's because he knows who he is and what he is. That's what it means for him to be true. I'm moving on to my conclusion. I'm sure you're anxious. The use of as if can be overlooked by readers. The king is unaware that he is as if dead. The queen does not have access to these words. But she cares immensely about whether her husband is dead, or as if dead. The queen's grief at Lamona's passing, her refusal to leave his side, and their mutual joy at his revival make this the most loving husband and wife relationship in the Book of Mormon. Indeed, even before he was fully standing, King Lamoni reaches his hand forth unto his beloved wife, praising God and this woman of exceeding faith. Testifies of Jesus Christ, swearing on the life of his beloved. He has seen his Redeemer, and this Redeemer shall redeem all. This is the moment the queen had hoped would be real. The moment in which she reaped the rewards of her faith and her diligence and her patience and her long suffering and her waiting. That is a good and glorious end. It's a miracle. But those of us who read a different story for 13 verses need a different miracle. We cannot let the outcome be mistaken for the message. Our miracle is the process and the story. We need to believe as if we were the young queen of the Lamanites. We are not her. We will never be her. Despite extreme pressures from within and without, she chose to believe Ammon. We can too. Despite what's obvious to her eyes, she acts in faith. We can too. Her faith is evident. We see her watching and waiting beside the body of the man she adores. She watches all night for signs of life. I imagine that each minute felt as if it were an eternity. Ammon calls that faith. So does Alma, and so do I. I read the Book of Mormon as if words matter. I have no guarantee that they do. But if I want certainty, I know where it is. And if I understand what this story is saying, I'm not sure I want that anymore. I know what it means to insist on believing before I'm willing to trust. I do not choose it. I want the less certain, the more vulnerable, the risky way. I want faith. Even if the Book of Mormon's words are as tiny as mustard seeds, I choose to study as if they matter. In my experience, they do. Time and time again, I've planted small words of this book, and I've worked and watched and waited. They grow. That means the words are good and true and real. But it does not mean that faith is finished. There are more words to plant. This is a slow process. At least it is for me. But I love the work of nourishing my soul with small and simple words of God. In them, I find life.
Thank you, Kylie. I appreciate very much your calling our attention to the small words and the tremendous power that they have.
Thank you.
I very much appreciate what you're sharing with us, and yet I want to deal with some questions that I guess maybe I'm struggling with, and hopefully you can help me.
Hopefully.
I encountered in a Mormon Stories podcast the information that the church has just published a new edition of the Book of Mormon with a new introduction. And it's an introduction, as I understand it, which changes the idea of the Book of Mormon being the principal antecedent of the American Indians to suggest that it was among the antecedents of the American Indians.
Mhm.
And that a number of changes were made, apparently simplifying it, reducing its size and so forth. But this would strike me as being, well, and because of the podcast, it struck me that it certainly was a challenge to faith of the people who believe the Book of Mormon. Apparently, the church leaders have recognized the work of Thomas Murphy and Simon Southerton, who have been on this forum, who have raised the point that the DNA of the American natives doesn't very well match the DNA of the Israelis, and therefore it's not a good fit to say that the Book of Mormon is the source for the Native Americans.
Right. Or at least not the one and only source.
Certainly. Well, and so the adjustment to go from saying it is the source to saying that it is among the sources is rather a significant adjustment.
Mhm.
And well, I've been looking back at earlier editions, and the others are rather clear that the advocacy of the Book of Mormon being the source of Native peoples in many cases from North America to South America is effectively then being challenged. The question, I guess, the question goes back then to the point you raised, that the faith is not about the outcome.
Right.
And at the same time, as I contemplate it, it looks to me like faith is about the outcome. Perhaps you can clarify that for me, and in the process, maybe if you can address the issue of the change of the introduction, I'd appreciate that too.
Well, I'm sure I'm not privy to some of these decisions, and I don't know that my answers are any more valuable than the insights that anyone could offer here tonight. I am trying to find that line from the introduction, because the part about being among the principal ancestors. Do you know what paragraph that's in? I seem to be scanning fruitlessly. I believe that was changed for the 2013 edition. Not something recent. I believe that was already done quite some time ago. So I'm trying to scan it here. I'm not coming up with the exact phrase. In any case, so in saying it's not, in saying it's about the outcome, let me understand you a little better. Are you saying that the outcome is the DNA evidence?
Well, no, yes, perhaps if the outcome of the scientific information disputes the premises that are used for evidence for the Book of Mormon, then it's a challenge of faith. I'm certainly aware that I may have misconstrued because I was listening to a podcast, and so my information may not be altogether accurate, but it certainly raised questions for me, and I was in hopes that you and our other erudite participants could help me out with some better information.
I'm not sure if Val is raising his hand because he has an answer to our questions or because he wants to ask another question.
I wanted
but-
to ask another question.
Oh, okay.
I can speak to this question too. It isn't just a matter of Sotherton. It's a matter of, for most of the history and when those original introductions were written, people had a hemispheric theory of the Book of Mormon. They thought the land southward was South America. They thought the narrow neck of land was the Isthmus of Panama. They thought North America was the land northward. But then people started studying the Book of Mormon, and they said, you know, how many days does it take to get from from this place to that place? And it turned out that the scope of the lands that are involved in the Book of Mormon is really very small. You're dealing with a few hundred miles of territory. So when they had that hemispheric reading of the Book of Mormon, which they had for about a century or more, it was natural to think of everybody in the Americas as being Lehi's family. But when scholars started looking at it and just reading really what's in the text, they'd long since concluded that it's a small area. It wasn't really dealing with all the populations of the Americas, and it's obvious there were other people here. We know that from a lot of different lines. It wasn't just the DNA, that was known from other things too. So that adjustment was just a lot of it was in response to the people showing that the hemispheric model didn't work. It really doesn't fit with the book. It's not what the book's saying.
Yes. And if I'm not mistaken, the introduction is modern. So I'm not entirely sure. I mean, frankly, I don't spend that much time with modern study helps or anything because I think they can be inaccurate. Before the 2013 edition came out, I used to find great joy in correcting footnotes in my Book of Mormon of, you know, verses that were reversed or little things that led you to something that didn't have anything to do with anything. I am more interested in studying the title page and the words of the book itself than the modern things, especially something that was written early on, before, like Val's pointing out, before anyone had studied the Book of Mormon very intently. I was listening to Grant Hardy once give a lecture, and he said, kind of off the cuff, that he knows the Book of Mormon better than Joseph Smith. And I was like, oh, you can't say that. That's so horrible. But of course he can, you know, because it translated it, was intimately acquainted with it. And some of the reception history that has been done recently was that the saints were, early saints were more aware of the Book of Mormon than perhaps we thought they were. But nevertheless, it's not the same as someone who has grown up with the book, read it multiple times and studied it their whole lives. they may not have the words or the skills or the intimate knowledge of the book as some other modern scholars do. I don't really count myself in that category, but thank you.
Well, you certainly should count yourself in that category. No one is a better close reader of the Book of Mormon than Kylie is. I've read lots of people, and she put that on display tonight. But lots of people who are scholars are very impressed with her close readings. That the comment or question I wanted to offer was, you said in passing, and it was full of implication, that it's not an accident that Lamoni rises on the third day. So there's that the queen is actually having an encounter, I think, with two symbolic Christ figures, because in that story, Ammon has been compared to a god as one who's all powerful, and there's lots of things that even his name is Egyptian for the head of the gods, and some have commented. So so she puts her faith in two figures. She puts her faith in Ammon, who has shown this immense power as a powerful being and is an apt Christ figure. And she puts her faith in a man who's going to rise from the dead on the third day. That's who she's putting her faith in. So that little piece you passed over, it was pregnant with information that I know you know. It's not, I'm not saying anything you want to know. I'm just trying to make it explicit. And I think he actually, for any of us to be saved, what the Book of Mormon says is, and Alma demonstrates this in his own life, he only needed two things. He went to hell before he could figure this out, but he had to come to Christ with a broken heart and a contrite spirit. And the queen has a broken heart with respect to her husband, and I think she has a contrite spirit with respect to Ammon. And that combination of her broken heart and contrite spirit gives her this faith that you're talking about. And all I love everything you had to say about it being consequential, that the way he would have been dead if she hadn't exercised that faith. And that faith opened up the possibilities. And it's the same thing with us and Christ. Christ is the one who rises on the third day. And if we exercise faith in him, he of course has life whether we do or not, but we will have life. And of course that comes to the queen later. She's raised from the dead to eternal life too. So it's an incredibly powerful story, and that detail you mentioned is deeply meaningful, as is Ammon's name and the things he'd been doing.
Yeah, and try this one on precise Val. See what you think of this idea. I do suggest that Ammon is godlike in his perspective. But I think it's also possible to see him as an Adam figure, not a Christ figure. He brings the fall of this entire society of Lamoni's palace world, I guess, if you will. And then it's Abish who becomes a Christ figure in some ways. She stretches forth her hand and raises the queen from the dead. And then the queen turns and raises the king. For the reverse gender story.
I totally agree with that. I have an article actually that deals with that, and it's part of it comes from when the Lamoni rises, he says, "Blessed be the name of God, and blessed art thou." He grammatically equates the divine God and the queen. Those it's or at least the name of God and the queen, and it leads. I think it does lead it to the fact that look, Abish would fit into your as if story too very much. She's the one person who's lived with, I think, who's had the same vision that Lamoni and everybody else is having. It says she had a vision of her father, but that could be capital F father, not lowercase father. Everybody thinks lowercase. Everybody else, it seems, is having a vision Lehi's vision. The word, close reading again, the word carried away is used here. It's the same. Lamoni is carried away. He
Yeah.
sees God being born of a woman. That's that woman again. He praises the woman. They are then raised by two women, because Abish raises the queen and the queen raises him. So yeah, I totally agree with you that subtext is there, and this links back to all the other carried away stories. Abish had that, I think, that same carried away vision that all the other people are then having at her as she raises them. And Lamoni's having the same vision that Nephi and Lehi had, and that Mary had, because Mary in the Nephi story was also carried away. That phrase is used for a woman in the Mary story, in the Nephi story, in the Lehi story here with Lamoni. By implication, the queen and Abish, all these people are having that vision that comes out of their faith, the faith that you're talking about here. But you got lots of other hands, or a couple other hands. So
Yeah.
I've got other questions for you, but let's get other people get in.
Yes, it is a great story. Is it Monty?
No, Brian's first and then Monty.
Brian? Okay.
Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, hey, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes, I was just gonna add that, yeah, I'm just confirming what y'all are saying. View was kind of an assumption from the Book of Mormon in the first century or century and a half, but as we study, languages and DNA and all such, and the Book of Mormon itself, like has been mentioned, and yeah, it's the Nephite, the Lehite peoples are, just a part of all the Americas, but there is, evidence of that. I mean, it was mentioned that the DNA evidence is might not seem favorable, but there is DNA evidence for Lehi. In fact, it's what's interesting is the greater amount of language evidence is in Uto-Aztecan, and that's also where some interesting DNA evidence is found. Lesser amount.
Thank you. I have to admit
And a
that.
few other language found, but
Oh,
yes, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. No, I'm sorry. I thought you were done speaking. You froze on my screen for 1 second. Please finish.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. Thanks. And about DNA evidence, I'm sure I've just read the same things that you people have. I am a literary scholar. I love the words much more than the science and other things. So I know it's fascinating. I see the number of downloads on those types of articles, but I just find this reading of the book more interesting than the science research. So sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. I'm
Okay.
just commenting on the other, that goes hand in hand with.
Mhm. So is it Monty now?
Yeah.
I was wanting to know if there are any other major ways in which the latest publication of the Book of Mormon differs from I think the newest one I have is 2013.
Yeah.
But
I'm not sure. I only know a few. There were thousands of changes. The vast majority of them are in the study helps. Again, the modern study helps where we mess up things. There are a few what I would consider substantial changes. One of them is actually in this when I was speaking to his son Corianton in Alma 39. I think this is a fairly substantial change. Well, I guess it's not a modern change. This was years ago. But let's see, what verse am I looking at? So in Alma 39, verse 13, Alma's telling Corianton that he needs to return to the Zoramites. And he says, Well, I guess starting in verse 12, so you have a little context. Now the Spirit of the Lord doth say unto me, command thy children to do good, lest they lead away the hearts of many people to destruction. Therefore I command you, my son, in the fear of God, that you refrain from your iniquities, that you turn to the Lord with all your mind, might, and strength, that you lead away the hearts of no more to do wickedly. Rather return unto them and acknowledge your faults, and that wrong which you have done. So before 1920, it said, acknowledge your faults and retain that wrong which you have done, which on the surface does not make much sense at all. Why would we want to retain the wrong which we have done? So I've seen in the UU archives a copy of James E. Talmage's, was Talmage, right? Who edited the Book of Mormon for the 1920 of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints edition, has a little editor's delete sign. Right to that, right on the margin of the page, that word's crossed out. And that says it's a delete. So it says, but rather return unto them and acknowledge the faults and that wrong which you've done. So the retain is just cut out. But through Royal Skousen's work, he's looked at printer's manuscript of that page and says, you know, there is a word there. There was a word there. We can't just delete a word willy-nilly. So he's checked Oliver Cowdery's handwriting and proposes that the word is repair rather than retain. And I think that's a significant difference in our understanding of repentance. So we're supposed to acknowledge our faults and repair that wrong, which we have done. And that to me would be one of those substantial changes that alters doctrine. It makes sense in Alma's story back in Mosiah 27, 26, 27, there are they after they see the angel, they go about trying to repair the wrongs which they've done. It seems to me that that's what Alma is continuing to do and teaches children to do. When you sin, you try to repair it, not just sort of say, oopsie, my fault.
Well, I'm like you. The words mean a great deal to me, and the changes that they're making in the latest edition, I would like to take a look at just to be sure that everything is copacetic with me. But that's just my problem. As for keeping track of your iniquities, I don't worry about that anymore because I have a wife.
Oh, King Lamona had a wife too, and she was a good one.
Oh, okay.
Kylie Carroll has a comment in the chat about who is Ronald Crosby, who was mentioned in the illustrations given at the beginning.
Ronald Crosby.
Carol is the artist of our group.
Oh, excellent. Ronald Crosby mentioned with the illustration at the beginning.
It was one of your slides.
Oh,
It had a notation at the bottom, I think.
It's probably one that I got from the Book of Mormon art catalog. The Maxwell Institute is working on collecting Book of Mormon art images. So I don't actually know who Ronald Crosby is. I just was citing it as I think that they suggested that you cite things. So I will check into that. I don't personally know Ronald Crosby.
Monty, I think you might have been misled by Paul's intro here. I don't think that our church has come out with a new edition. Kylie said that was the 2013. And I think that the podcast, Paul, was that an older podcast? Or they might have just been commenting on we came up with one. But again, there's no new, as far as I know, edition of the Book of Mormon from the LDS Church. The 2013, I think, was that last edition. It's certainly the one they put the principal among the principal ancestors in. That's been around for a long time.
That's what I was thinking. And I thought, well, maybe I just haven't paid attention and some news popped up over the last week or something and I missed it entirely.
If I could quickly jump in here, The controversy just in the last couple of days was that apparently on the missionary app that the LDS Church has released, they had done a new introduction, which has now been withdrawn, apparently. It was like up for only a month or so. And it was actually just a very simplified introduction. It was a very stripped down introduction intended for an audience that was not familiar with the Book of Mormon. So that went up for a short period of time and apparently now has been withdrawn. But the change to the language about the people of the Book of Mormon being among the principal ancestors as opposed to the principal ancestors of the American Indians, that was a language change that was made in 2006. And but it was sort of got raised with this new introduction, which omitted that, plus a lot of other descriptive language about the Book of Mormon that had been or is in the current LDS introduction to the Book of Mormon, which, as I say, it's a bit confused because that introduction still is in place and in fact appears to be now the only introduction, as this shorter simplified introduction apparently was on, and that created a lot of buzz online in the last few days. So that's just a little news flash as to what's been going on. That is maybe what Paul's referring to.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes, the podcast was from this week and indicated that the change had been made this month. And so I appreciate your explanation, because for it to have been put up, given an airing and then taken down again, and that makes some sense. Other questions? Let me raise one more then. I was struck a little bit by the dichotomy that prevails through your discussion.
Yeah, it's an oversimplification, I'm aware. But I
Yes,
think there's productive things to learn from it.
well, I understand that, but at the same time, since I don't commonly allow my students to use yes or no questions and get a satisfactory answer, then I'm wondering if you, to what extent the gray areas, the areas in between, because the description here of the ladies coming in is something I think has not been explored sufficiently in my understanding, and yet I agree that it's highly important. Having been married to an angel for 50 years, I can appreciate that they are a tremendous resurrecting power, and this illustrates it. And yet that seems almost, well, it's sort of a later branch to the story rather than being a direct line of from the beginning of the story.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's my perception on it, and I'm wondering to what extent you see faith as having more than either or.
Yeah. Well, the problem is, it's not a problem, of course, but I think the Book of Mormon is the doctrine of two ways. Well, Reynolds has an article about the doctrine of two ways. I think a lot of the Book of Mormon is presented in that manner, kind of in line with the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, where lots of things are presented as either or. You prosper in the land or you cast out of his presence. And so yes, there absolutely is gray area, and I understand that, and we understand that. And yet, to be faithful to how the text is presented, it's presented kind of in this either or manner. So I was trying to read it and be faithful to that and present it. Yes. So we understand there's a gray area between these two extremes, if you will. And we don't want to fall into an either or fallacy problem. And yet I still sometimes think at the heart of it all, there is this decision between God and something, anything other than God, between faith and not faith. Really in the story, the queen can act or not act. And we mess it up. We bring in all these other situations and politics and things that are pressuring her. I sometimes wonder if we could put away the clutter. The Book of Mormon asks us to read and make decisions in this manner. I don't know if that answers your question or just says that I'm a lot less nuanced than other people. I try to see the people as real and as interacting as real as I can make them seem to me through the details of the stories. But the world they're interacting with seems to be presented, exactly as you're mentioning, kind of this either or fallacy. And ultimately, I think it's Jesus who says, if we're lukewarm, he would spew us out of his mouth. And one last thing is that the way this plays out, to me, makes sense for our world in some ways. We tend to see things. And there's a lot of things that we make gray, we paint gray, that maybe should be clarified at times, and just pushed a little bit to decisions. I've read recently about this modern generation and how they won't commit to anything. Studies are showing that if you'll commit to something, you'll actually be happier. But they refuse to commit to anything until they have the proof, which, as Alma saying, is backwards. It's not how faith works. And so I think maybe the Book of Mormon is useful in that manner for our time period, for this rising generation to make a decision on something, to commit to something, instead of hanging back and waiting to see what everyone on Facebook does first. So I don't know, if you catch me on tomorrow, I'll probably give you a different answer to that question.
I appreciate that that it's not a question that is readily yielding to a multiplicity of answers that will satisfy me. But let me explain that my assistant a year ago spent a month in a coma.
Yeah.
And we prayed for her, and the doctors indicated that she would not likely come out unimpaired. And yet she now has come out of it and graduated from college, and she's working as my assistant intern. And while I've been somewhat impaired because of the accident I had 2 months ago, she was able to basically put everything together at the Joseph Smith Historic Site, including yesterday's Christmas tea, which involved more than 100 people coming in, and to have seen the outcome of our faith in her actually being a resurrected person is the kind of thing that frames some of my question for you, and so I appreciate that. While you're speaking of the dichotomy, I think Abby's experience and our experience with her, and my experience with nearly dying in an accident 2 months ago, and yet here I am doubly blessed. Not only am I alive, but the doctors are able to glue me back together. They glued the 3 broken vertebra and reduced the pain by 50%. Is that not a miracle?
Yeah, absolutely, it is. And I will share a story in return, 2 short stories actually. My sister, I quoted her in the paper. She's the one who first pointed out the not true thing to me. A number of years ago, her 2-year-old fell in the ditch in Idaho. You know these stories, and drowned. And even though she was 7 months pregnant, she bailed in, hauled him out, and resuscitated him. And they whipped him off to the hospital. It was a horrifying situation. And he was miraculously fine. And the doctor was saying, if he wakes up, he will never be normal. And the kid was riding his bike, and it was a trike actually, down the stairs 4 days later. Walked right to the cupboards, pulled out the toys he wanted, and it was it was a miracle. Actually, the doctor made them test the water that they pumped out of Eli's lungs 4 different times. He was in the dirty ditch water at the end of October, and the water came out clean 4 different times. And then my sister, years ago, lost her 16-year-old to cancer. Walked out of that same hospital, this time without the miracle, so to speak. And yet she would testify today that the miracle is that God was with her both times in both stories, even as she walked out of the same hospital. And I've been very moved. In fact, that last Tree of Life picture, that's a picture of her family. With Mason still there. He's an artist, did that for them. I think the miracle is the process. And I love the outcome. I love when the outcome happens. But the miracle is that God is with us through all of those times.
Thank you for sharing your personal testimony. Beautiful to see God's miracles in our lives.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay, Val, and then Monty. Go ahead, please, Val.
Just on the either or thing, it's really true that the Book of Mormon does have that doctrine of the 2 ways, and it's in there in Moroni. And I think the reason is, and it very much relates to your presentation today, the Queen had a choice to make. And that, as you say, that choice was very consequential. The Old Testament says there's the way of life and there's the way of death. And that's basically what she had. She had the way of life and the way of death. And the way of life is the one that your sister's also chosen. That's why she sees the world as she does. If we have to choose to come into Christ and receive his atonement or not choose it. That's really the core question, and it's an either or question. If people receive the Savior as their Redeemer, they're going to get a dichotomously different outcome than if they don't make that choice in this life. So I think in that sense, there is a dichotomous truth that the Book of Mormon is teaching, and that's what it is. It's we accept Christ, we do as the Queen did, or we don't. And our outcomes, as you said, are very different based on that act of faith. The question I wanted to ask you about is, well, first, just it is interesting that the Queen, when she's raised by Abish, it said she arose and stood upon her feet, and then that exact same phrase is used about the king. So the king and queen are each raised and stand upon their feet in the same way, and there's a kind of implication that they're standing side by side as the redeemed as the redeemed rulers of this kingdom, a man and woman, each redeemed in the same way. But what I wanted to ask you is, you talked about the reversal, the gender reversal there. Did you have other thoughts on that? I'd really be interested in hearing what you've thought about that, or if you have anything else you didn't say but might on that.
Just a little bit. Mostly I've looked at it as a plan of salvation narrative. And if you look up the word fall, it is used a ridiculous amount of times in this story. Everything is falling, swords are falling, people are falling on the ground, everyone's falling all the time. I mean, it's when the leader of the robbers, well, the brother of the leader of the robbers, the leader got killed by Ammon, is going to go slay Ammon while he's there on the ground. And he's going to like let his sword fall upon Ammon. You know, it's the word fall is used so many times. It should scream to us, this is a plan of salvation narrative. We're talking about the fall here. And then this redemption process where a woman reaches out and touches, and it's weird phrasing. It's let's see, as soon as she touched her hand, then the queen arose and stood upon her feet, which this touching of hands seems symbolic to me and important in a plan of salvation. She's really going to raise the queen up from laying on the ground where she's fallen down. I don't think she's going to touch her hand. She's going to grab her under the neck or whatever, I don't know, but something more vivid than touching like that. So it's a moment of a symbolic touch of hands of sorts between two women, instead of between a woman who's a Christ-like figure who is not down on the ground. The only person remaining standing is Abish herself. Everyone else is down at this point in time, on the ground, fallen. And they all fall, and yet with Abish alone, as a person who can reverse this situation and change it.
There's
Like you said, the queen turns to the king and does the same touch of hands and the symbolic gesture.
There's a structural connection there between, you have two different figures. You have Ammon, who's a servant, and you have Lamoni, who's the king. And on the woman, you have Abish, who's the servant, and the regal queen. And I think both of them are communicating something about the divine.
Yeah.
The role of God as servant and the role of God as ruler of the universe.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, a friend of all of ours, probably Joe Spencer, he suggested to me that arise and stand upon your feet actually has some sexual innuendos involved in it. So that the queen and the king of both rise and stand on your feet. And I like your suggestion that they would be next to each other as an implication of a full marriage relationship. For whatever that's worth, I don't know where he got that from or exactly where it was going, but I tend to trust Joe's insights.
Well, Pete is Old Testament euphemism for genitals, among other things.
Yeah, well, that would do it then.
Let me add another angle on that. Excuse me, Monty, for intruding here. But when Rena and I were called to be ministers together, to be elders together, one of the scriptures that we studied here was this one that showed us that the king and queen were fundamentally resurrected to minister to their people, to help their people become people of the land of peace.
Yeah.
And for Rena and myself, I think that characterized the 37 years we got to share in ministry together. And I therefore believe it to be an implication, at least, of priestly authority for women to be able to share in ministry and And that's, I think Lamoni and his wife are an example of that.
And clearly, the plan of salvation narrative is touched there as well. And the queen arises and says, "Oh, blessed Jesus, who has saved me from an awful hell. Oh, blessed God, have mercy on this people." There, she is not being helped up from falling down on the ground. This is a whole different story of what's going on there.
The power of real ministry.
Yeah. Yeah. Raises from a worse death than physical death. Monty? Is it Monty's turn?
Yep.
Yes.
Well, Paul, you not only had an angel you were married to, you shared her ministry with the rest of the church, which was very, very important. I mean, I don't think I'll ever forget her. But the other thing I wanted to mention is, before we let you up on a tractor like that again, we're gonna work on your dismount, because
All right.
you did a good job on that one.
Well, you'll notice that I was using my head.
But we love to lose you due to some silly, gymnastics accident. So we have to coach you.
Well, if you don't have another question or comment for Kylie, I do. I find that the name Turley is so powerfully embedded in the church history. I had the privilege of digging on the Turley site in Nauvoo, so I'm awfully interested in what possible relationship she has there with
Yes,
Theodore.
it's my husband's family, and Theodore is I asked him today to refresh my memory. It's his third great grandfather. So he goes right back to Theodore, who we spend much time laughing at. That poor man is just always on the fringes of history. Gets put in prison on that great mission to England and stays there and gets out on the last day or so to go on the boat and go home. And there's just so many stories. He never quite gets there. But he certainly spent a lot of time around people that we read about in scripture, even in Doctrine and Covenants and elsewhere in church history.
Well, the fact that he was next door neighbors to Joseph Smith, and the fact that he was accused of making counterfeit money. These
I
are
missed the counterfeit money. I just got the Nauvoo brewery stories. So
the foundation for the brewery is there, and clearly Joseph Smith authorized that. It's not quite clear that he authorized the construction of the bogus, for which he and then we found a bogus coin about just a few feet from where Governor Ford gave his address on the day that Joseph was killed. So the question of where did that bogus coin come from? So, but Theodore clearly was very personally involved with a lot of the essential activities of the church. And so we can find a few scurrilous things to say about him, but there's also some good things to say about him. He built the first house of the Mormons in Nauvoo, a log house. And when Bob Bray found what probably is a little bit of the footings of it, and and I got to see the footing wall with the brick and limestone, which perhaps some of these days the Turleys will have a chance to get restored.
Yeah, well, we'll have to maybe print some of that fake money and find a way to pay for it, won't we?
Yeah. Well, the copy is in the archives in Independence now, so you get an accurate rendition of that book of money.
And I
It's
did
actually,
not say that out loud, did I?
it is an 1842 piece of 8, and
That is fantastic.
Mexicana, and so it's really in pretty good shape. So yes, you should be able to get a good copy.
Perfect. Great.
Actually, they should be worth something, I would think.
I would think so.
Okay, Brian, go ahead.
Hi, Kylie. I just wanted to ask, there was a President Turley of the Southwest Indian Mission from 1964 to 67, I believe. Would he be a relative of your husband or an ancestor or great uncle or great great uncle? Probably he'd probably be 2 generations above. But have you heard of a relative Turley that was mission president of the Southwest Indian Mission in Arizona and New Mexico?
No, but the family is really large and of course polygamous. And so it spreads really far, really quickly. And I'm sure
Okay,
they're
yeah,
related somehow, but
they probably related somehow. And what part of Wyoming are you from?
I'm from Cody. It's
Oh,
northeastern to tell you
my sister
Yellowstone.
lives in Cody.
Oh, really?
Uh, she's
Kara?
married to Brent Crooks. Her
Oh,
name is Rita Crooks, Rita Stubbs Crooks.
yes. There's lots of Crooks families up in that area. I'm sure my mom would know them. I'm not
And
sure.
John Robertson is a good friend. He's the linguist
yeah.
that he was the chair of the linguistics department when he started supporting my research. But yeah, he's a good friend from Cody also, I believe.
Amazing how many good people are from Cody, isn't it?
Yeah. Hey, I'm done. Cool.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. And Blair, if that's who we're at now.
Yep.
I wanted to thank you for your presentation. Anything that brings us to the Book of Mormon and raises our spirits to the truths of the Book of Mormon is well worthwhile, and I thank you for that. But the reason I wanted to raise my hand here was for Paul. Paul, I've been been watching these programs for about 4 years. I didn't get in on the beginnings of them, but I've been watching about 4 years, and I've never seen anything about the DNA findings. We always kind of pass over that. We say that the scientific evidence doesn't indicate that there is any Jewish DNA in the Americas. I would like to sometime have a short period of time where we discuss that, because I believe in science. I am a scientist. I, however, think that the scientists designed their program wrong and excluded the people they were looking for in their design of their program. So, and I think we ought to talk about that. I haven't heard anybody speak about how the scientists arrive at their conclusions. And I'm not prepared to do anything except give my impressions on the scientific method that was used. So is there a way we could get that included in the discussion?
Blair, we've had 4 presentations. Simon Southerton gave the story of his book, An Excommunication. Thomas Murphy was I think the first one who really raised the issue and was threatened with excommunication. And then we also had Rod Meldrum, who made the case for DNA tied to Israel through the Iroquois. And we've had a couple of other passing references, but you're right, we've not had anything on DNA for the last couple of years. And so you may be right that they were all in that first year, in which case I'm certainly happy to see if we can't draft someone that will meet your science.
Yeah, if somebody if you abandon the hemisphere theory, which the church did when scholars started getting the limited geography, just looking at the internal geography, if you assume there were already millions or even hundreds of thousands of people here, when, like, let's say Lehi's party was as many as 100 people, even standard genetic theory says you wouldn't expect to find any of their residual DNA based on that. So it really, even within just standard genetics, a small population coming into a very large population, you don't expect to find their DNA. It's like we could be descendants of Abraham, literal descendants of Abraham. We probably have no, what a geneticist would say is you have no actual genes whatsoever from Abraham at this point, given all the generations between. So it really, if you change the assumptions about existing populations and the size of Lehi's party, a lot of this stuff dissolves.
So yes, it is a topic that I'm quite willing to have us continue to explore. I know we have Earl Watt, who has some expertise in the topic, but I haven't been able to entice him to present yet. So maybe this discussion will motivate him.
Well, I would be glad to sit in on a panel of some sort to discuss this. But I'm not in a position that I think I can handle the driving force of it.
Well, we've had Simon did come back and did not want to have his part recorded and published. Thomas Murphy, on the other hand, I think would be quite willing to return for that kind of discussion. And so I think it becomes possible for us to, if we could get Thomas and Rod Meldrum, perhaps be a good combination, showing two different sides of that issue.
Okay. Thank you. I think there are other things that need to be considered than what science has reported.
Yeah, it tends to be a pretty narrow focus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're coming close to 10 o'clock, and some of us have work, but I would pause for another question or comment for Kylie, because I recognize that some of us get distracted here with our peripheral conversations.
I'm good. I don't want to keep you later. I forgot that you were an hour past when I am, so my apologies if people need to get to sleep.
Well,
Oh, you know what? I will tell you one other thing that I think is absolutely fantastic, and I just am so excited about it. And that is when it dawned on me that Avish is the only one standing, you realize, oh, well, some of this must come from her, that she would be the only source of the story that we know for this part. I mean, for her to tell us about her background, and also that she decided to run forth and talk and go gather the townspeople. It's only Abish that we know that story from. And that led me to realize that all you have to do is swap out pronouns. There's not even a verb tense change or anything. And you can read this whole section, well, verse and a half, from her perspective. You don't have to, you believe that there was working with multiple source documents, and I think in Helaman 3, there's evidence that that is a fact. And it's among the anti-Nephi Lehis that there are, that bring up the possibility of Lamanite sources, and realize that we may well have the words of a Lamanitish woman tucked right into scripture. All you have to do is switch the verb tense, and not the verb tense, all you have to do is switch the pronoun over from she to I. And you might actually have the words of a woman hidden below the surface of the text. It's amazing. It's absolutely, I love that.
Another small twist of the little words to make such a profound and powerful difference.
Yeah.
Thank you. I thank you again for your beautiful insights and for sharing with us this evening. I'd like to invite you back for next Monday, because it'll be the review session where we invite each of the previous 8 presenters to give us a 5-minute summation, if that's
Oh, sure.
good.
Okay.
Kylie
then-
has done many other presentations on the Book of Mormon besides this one. She's got a lot. This is one of her presentations. I think,
Yeah.
James, did you have a question? I saw you raising your hand. I thought,
Yeah, I can't find my raise hand button here, but this is just a small point, but maybe a nice one to end on. Val had written an article, which you may or may not be familiar with, on this particular incident in the Book of Mormon. And shortly after I became aware of it, I moved into a new ward and had the opportunity to meet a young woman whose name was Abish. She was from an LDS family from Guatemala, I believe. And so I was pleased to both meet her and to forward her Val's article so that she could learn some more about her namesake. So I don't know, that's just an interesting side note to note that Abish is a figure who's recognized by having people named after her. At least one young sister I've met named after her, and certainly would be a worthy person to serve as a namesake for any woman in a Book of Mormon believing family.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. I'm quite fond of her myself. I have a little article coming out as well. Because I can manage to wring a whole lot out of a verse and a half, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Well, thank you all for your comments and questions, for maintaining amicable relationships throughout. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord lift up his face to shine on you. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord lift up his face to shine on you. Good night.
Right.